make it. I know everybody's got a lot of demanding schedules, and I'll throw in a pitch as we're waiting here. Blandon has their broadband conference the next couple of days too. So if anybody has their time on hand and any time on their hands, you can sure register for that if you want to learn a little bit more about rural broadband. Great, we'll get another minute here and then we'll get started because I want to make sure we start on time and end on time. So welcome everybody. And if you want to throw in the chat where you're joining us from this morning, we'll get started here in a couple minutes.
Texas boy who was reunited with his family. I worried about this little kid all weekend, so I was over the moon. We got the news. The 3-year-old.
And just a reminder for folks too, if you wouldn't mind going on mute during the webinar, that'd be great. And then we won't have background noise. And
Christopher, you all remember.
Alrighty. Well, Whitney, I think we're going to get started. I know we have more people signed up to join us this morning, but just want to make sure that we're using everybody's time efficiently. And I want to thank everybody for coming this morning. My name is Teresa Kittredge, and I'm the founder of 100 Rural Women. And I'm joining you today from Marcel Township. So when you think about geography, I'm about 4 hours north of Minneapolis and about 90 miles south of the Canadian border. So right up in the middle there. So, and this isn't my actual background this morning, but this is where I like to kayak. So I thought I had to show that this morning as we head into our fall season. So 100 Rural Women is, we're really all about creating connections and inspiring leadership. And we really strive to figure out how can we better connect women so we can better support each other, and how do we support each other in pursuing leadership. So that's really what we are about. We have had a busy time. We just are wrapping up 50 convenings that we were doing around the state, and those 50 convenings are going to inform our next 50, because whose idea was it to do 100 meetings across the state? I always tease, but I guess it was mine, and it's been incredible. We've met the most amazing women and really learned a lot, and really think that with these next 50, we can really add value to all the women that we connected with and who we hope to connect with in the future. And before I introduce our speaker and get started, I'd like to do a little internal introduction at 100 Rural Women. So I want to start out with a couple of our students and fellows. So Emma, do you want to introduce yourself as part of 100 Rural Women?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I am Emma Higgins. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm a fellow from Lead for Minnesota, and I've been working with Teresa and with 100 Rural Women for almost 6 months now, and it's just been awesome. I am originally from Manhattan, New York, so making the trek over to Minnesota was definitely a big move, and I'm so glad I did it. I just feel so connected to this place and really excited to have a rich conversation this morning. I'll pass it over to Delaney.
My name is Delaney. Some faces look familiar from previous meetings, but I'm working with 100 Rural Women this summer, not summer anymore, summer and now fall, and hopefully longer, working on the 100 and 100 project, helping to conduct research and talk about rural women and how we can better support you and through our programming. So it's been such a delight. I'm a current Master's of Public Health student at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, studying maternal and child health, and I'm actually really in the process right now of applying for medical school because I want to become a rural OBGYN. That's where I come really invested in rural health and specifically rural women's health. So thanks so much for being with us today, and I can hand it on to Jasmine as well.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, I'm a little sick, so excuse my voice, but I'm Jasmine. I am an undergrad student at the University of Minnesota Morris, and I've been with 100 Rural Women since June, and I'm alongside Delaney working with the 100 and 100 project, and I've been having a blast, and I'm just really excited to be here and listen to the conversation. So I'll hand it over to Ryan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ryan. I'm currently in AmeriCorps Vista with 100 Rural Women. And part of my project is working closely with Teresa and Delaney and Jasmine and Emma in order to make sure that we are conducting research for these conferences and webinars. And I'm just so excited to be here and to chat with everybody. And I will pass it back to Teresa.
Well, wonderful. And as you can see, we are incredibly fortunate. Oh, we've got a little bit of here. I gotta do some, if everybody could mute themselves, that would be great. There we go. I think I got it. Alrighty. Just incredibly excited to have this webinar this morning. A couple things as we talked. Zoom is, regular, everybody's been on a million Zooms, but if you can stay muted, that would be great. When we started this webinar series, the first one we did like this, and the second one we did as a webinar. People are like, no, we want to see each other. So we call them webinars, but it's a Zoom format. So please, we want our chat to be active, and we'll post links in the chat, but we want you to chat. And please put questions in during our first part of our webinar so we can share those questions with Whitney, because we want to learn more about Whitney, the work she does, an upcoming conference, and then we also want to be able to have some audience Q&A to learn more. So please do that, and we will get started here. Our webinar series started right when COVID hit, you guys. The organization was really just formally launching. It was like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? And it was, oh, we can bring women together virtually. Let's do it with webinars and lift up amazing rural women doing incredible work. And so that's how we are coming to this today. And I want to introduce Whitney Kimball Coe. Whitney is the Vice President and Director of National Programs at the Center for Rural Strategies. And I'm going to let Whitney really go deeper into her background, because it's amazing. And she's amazing. And I told her the other day when we talked that for many of us, as we've moved through our careers, especially some of us who are at the tail end like me, it's very rare in your life that you're going to meet true collaborators. And Whitney is one of those. And I'm just really excited to have her share her story today and her journey, and talk about the multitude of work she does, not only professionally, but in her community, and share a little bit about her vision for the future, and about her amazing work, and her commitment to family, community, and engagement. So anyway, Whitney, I am going to turn it over to you, and just maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself. And I mean, I'll just let you. We'll just sort of free form with this, which will really be fun. And I might ask you a couple questions, but I'm just going to hand it right over to you to tell us more about yourself. And
yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you, Teresa. And I'd love for you to, ping me with some questions just to keep the ball rolling, because sometimes I tend to go off on tangents. I'm so excited to be with you all today. What a great turnout for this morning webinar. I hope everybody has coffee and you're comfortable wherever you're sitting. While I talk, if you want to, feel free to go to www.ruralassembly.org and peruse that site. That's where I spend a lot of my time and a lot of energy these days, thinking about the story we're telling for and about rural people and places with national platforms. So just to take some steps back, let's see. I'm Whitney Kimball Coe. I'm calling in today from Isle of Palms, which is near Charleston, South Carolina. I'm on vacation with my family. So if you see little girls running around, my daughters are here, my niece. I'm here with my extended family, the same family whom I see every day in Athens, Tennessee. We live on what we call a family compound. My parents live just kind of catty corner to us, and my sister-in-law and brother and their daughter live just behind us. So for the past, 8 years or so, we've just been in and out of one another's houses. And that was kind of the life that I'd been seeking and wishing for a long time. And it took a while to get there. So I started with the Center for Rural Strategies in 2008. And at that time, it was a small nonprofit in Whitesburg, Kentucky, in the coal fields of Kentucky. And a lot of the work that Rural Strategies was doing at that time was around kind of public service campaigns or public interest campaigns that we were trying to drive, more interest in rural America, to deepen narratives about rural, to make them a little more complex, to talk about the diversity you can find in rural America. And I was coming into this organization with only just my own experience of growing up in rural, but I didn't realize that there was a whole field of rural advocates and people who had identified a deep need to make sure that rural people and places were represented in national conversations. So I was really, really green when I started at Rural Strategies with Dee Davis and Tim Merima, and the Daily Yonder, our rural news publication, had just gotten started around that time. I was thinking back to what 2008 looked like at my desk. Like, I had a huge, thick desktop computer, and I had an actual phone with speed dial on it, and that's how we used to make appointments and talk to people across the country. You would actually pick up the phone and call them, and not spend all that time emailing back and forth and scheduling times. And I didn't know what I was doing. I knew we had a little bit of funding from the Kellogg Foundation to pull rural leaders together from all 50 states across the country, across different sectors, to talk about what rural people and places have in common and how can we lift our voices. But I didn't know how you do that. My background is in religion and philosophy and in Appalachian studies. I have a master's in Appalachian studies. And so when it was time to jumpstart this work, I feel like I was just kind of making things up as I was going along. And that I found that as I've talked to other rural advocates and leaders across the country, that's kind of par for the course. We're just piecing together what we know and putting our skills, using the skill sets that we have to drive some change. That first year, we did have what we called a rural assembly, a national rural assembly. It was in Washington, D.C., and we had about 300 rural leaders come from different places across the country to D.C., and we had a bunch of public policy officials come and speak. I remember Tom Daschle was there. I'm trying to think who, I think even Mitch McConnell maybe spoke. And the idea was to get rural people and national policymakers together to talk about the issues that were affecting them. And it was so incredible to see that even people coming from the health sector or the housing sector or arts and culture, all of these folks in the room, they were all talking about similar deficits that they were feeling like rural was experiencing around broadband access, around healthcare and education access, quality of life issues were being brought up. But then at the same time, from the same course of people, folks were talking about how powerful it is to live and work in a rural community and know your neighbors and know kind of the intricacies of how things work and wearing many different hats. So it was like this just really rich alchemy of conversation. And so from that, we decided we needed to keep producing rural assemblies. We needed to keep convening rural leaders together so they would feel more connected, less isolated and alone, more empowered by understanding that other people are working on and struggling with these same issues. And we also wanted to keep a presence in front of national policymakers and leaders. So that was 2008. And so I've been with Rural Strategies since then. And the Rural Assembly has grown and changed over that time. It's interesting. The first time I've met so many people who came in that room, there were a lot of older white men who had been leading some really incredible organizations, everything from RUPRI to the Housing Assistance Council, to other groups that we are real familiar with. And over time, those roles have changed, and Rural Assembly is now majority women, a large majority of young women, in fact, who've stepped into executive director roles or leadership roles, and also many more BIPOC women and youth are participating now, and that seems to be that, I mean, I think that is indicative of our country as a whole. Of course, we're changing, we're growing, we're becoming more diverse. But also the rural advocacy field is no longer just about closing digital divide or addressing those deficits that I was talking about around housing or education. Rural advocacy is also about equity and about inclusion and about how we are acknowledging the land upon which we stand, how we are acknowledging the communities, the shoulders upon which our communities have been built. And I think that's been a really important shift. And it's also been really rich for Rural Assembly going forward. So what do you think, Teresa? What else should I share?
Yeah, I think a couple things that, Whitney is, really active in her community. Can you talk a little bit about Civic Saturdays?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I started off telling you all that I really wanted to move back home. And that was very difficult at first. After I got my master's in Appalachian Studies, the move back to a small town with limited broadband or with limited housing options, and it would have been difficult to make a go of it without coming with some assets of my own. So it took about a decade. I ended up working in Knoxville for a while and in Maryville, Tennessee, which are bigger towns, bigger cities with better broadband and more amenities. And then finally, we got better broadband in Athens, and my husband and I were able to move home. And I was able to work remotely for the Center for Rural Strategies, and I was able to really plug into the community that raised me and shaped me. And my idea was that I could plug in very locally, just show up at all the things, everything from city council meetings to county commission meetings to school board meetings to whatever was happening in downtown Athens, just show up and participate, not try to lead or change things or push against the grain yet, but just to participate. And so that's what I did for a solid 3 years when we moved back. And my children started going to the same elementary schools that I went to when I was growing up. And we started having Sunday dinners as a family compound. And it was really just a lot of grounding in connection, relationship, and participation. That was what I was doing. And that led me to want to do more and take on some leadership roles. And I found this really wonderful organization and program. The organization is called Citizen University, and maybe you all have heard of it. Some of you might be familiar with Civic Saturdays. Citizen University is run by Eric Liu and a wonderful team out in Seattle, Washington. And their focus is on growing civic engagement and participation in all the places. And they have this program called Civic Saturday, which is about equipping just your average local grassroots leaders with kind of a curriculum for bringing people together on a Saturday for an hour and celebrating what it means to be a citizen in our country, and how do we practice citizenship. And we do that by talking about issues that our local community might be facing at any given time, like a sales tax referendum or the growing of a new school or something like that. So you can use that space to grow local participation in issues that matter to your community. So I've been leading a Civic Saturday since 2018, since I went through that program, and we do it quarterly. And I've been able to seed it with the Main Street program that we have in Athens. And so they help me organize and bring people together. And the coolest thing for me about Civic Saturday is that the people who speak at Civic Saturday or who kind of oversee the gathering are people who have not been tapped before. That's been kind of a foundational piece of our programming, is that we want to make sure that the people who are leading it are folks who maybe haven't had a platform before or haven't had the opportunity to participate in some leadership position. So that's what Civic Saturday has meant and what it's been.
And just, I'm gonna ask one more question, then we'll move to audience
Mhm.
Q&A. So pop any questions in the chat, and some people have private messaged me a couple messages already for questions. But when we talk about home, can you talk a little bit about, I mean, you work for a national organization. What kind of work have you done in DC? I mean, have you testified in front of Congress? You know, a couple of those things. Can you just share some of the, where some of this work has taken you on a national stage?
Mhm. Yeah, you know, something I'd never, I don't think I understood how national policy works when I started in 2008. And it was another rad rural woman, Maya Inzer from Sustainable Northwest, a little organization out in Oregon, who was the policy director there. And you know, she worked on conservation issues. She was a master at national public policy advocacy work. And she just took me under her wing and told me all about how do you do a Hill visit? How do you get in front of not just your local congressional members, but how do you like pool together groups of people, bring them to DC and give a presentation? So using her her support and her blueprint, Rural Assembly started doing that with broadband in particular. And we found that the most powerful thing we could do was identify local leaders from different rural places across the country, make sure that they represent kind of a diversity of background, experiences, and issues, bring them together in DC and just go visit a bunch of different offices. And if you can, as you build relationships with those offices, ask if they would like a testimony or a panel or a presentation of some kind, that they can link up arms with another policymaker across the aisle. So we were able to do that with rural child poverty. In 2018, we had a Senate hearing on rural child poverty in the Kennedy room in the Senate. And it was really well attended and such a powerful conversation. Mill Duncan, who has been with Carsey Institute and is, you know, kind of a leader in research about rural child poverty, moderated the panel. And we just came with a lot of recommendations, but the recommendations themselves came from just individuals, people, you know, living in Hazard, Kentucky, the Gila River Reservation in New Mexico, or Arizona, people on the board. We brought someone from the Colonias on the border to speak. And those sorts of combinations are just unusual, unexpected on the Hill. And we just found it to be really powerful. And I got to say, I don't know how, you know, it seems like public policy moves at a snail's pace, but what we believe at Rural Strategies and what we believe at Rural Assembly is that if you start to change people's perceptions about one another and change narratives that we tell ourselves, stories we tell ourselves about other people by showing, like really presenting and showing the nuance and the geography and the diversity that exists, then public policy follows suit. Policy follows perception.
I love it. And Whitney, before we move to audience questions, can you talk a little bit about the upcoming conference? And of course, we'll give ourselves a shameless plug because we're fortunate to have a panel at the conference. Can you talk about that and why it's important for women to participate?
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm so glad, Teresa, that 100 Rural Women is hosting a session, and it's going to be fantastic. So Rural Women Everywhere is our virtual conference. It's happening next week, the 19th and the 20th. You can check it out on ruralassembly.org. It's free. There's a main stage portion that's from 2 to 4 both days. And we've got some an incredible lineup of those amazing voices from both local, state, and national places, talking about the important role that we know women play all around us in rural communities and in tribal communities. Oftentimes, we know that women are not given designated titles or are not holding formal leadership positions, but they are the ones who are behind the scenes, creating and driving and keeping culture, they're sort of like tradition keepers too. So we want to lift that up. I did get an email the other day from someone, a man asking if he could attend or if this is just exclusively for women. And I said, absolutely not. You know, this is for women and their allies. And then he wrote back and said, well, are you going to do a rural men's conference at some point? And I wrote back and said, well, as long as women are still making 82 cents on the dollar, we will be hosting and elevating women's voices. So hopefully he'll show up, but I've gotten a few questions like that from people.
I love it. And the keynote, why don't you tell us about your keynote? Because I think that's
Yes.
extremely exciting.
Yeah, so the keynote, oh, this is really difficult, y'all. This morning I heard that our keynote has canceled. She has she has a scheduling conflict. So you all are the first to hear this news, and I'm trying to figure out how to communicate it and how to fill this slot. Our keynote was Deb Haaland, who's the Secretary of the Interior, an incredible speaker and woman, and she's got a lot of shit on her plate to deal with. So she's like, you know, that's what she's doing. Totally understand. So we are working on, you know, bringing someone else from the Biden administration to speak. And it was last April, this April that we had rural assembly everywhere. It was another virtual event, not exclusively about women, but it was another virtual event. We had Susan Rice speak at that one. And the October before that, you know, we had several other people from the Biden administration. So just wanting to make sure the Biden administration is present and is participating in this conference. So we will have a wonderful reveal and surprise. I'm sure it will be incredible. But if you look at the lineup of other speakers, it's deep, it's radical, it's beautiful. It's kind of like in my just out of a dream for me. It's really wonderful who's coming. And Teresa's among them, and 100 Rural Women is hosting a breakout session, which is going to be fantastic. And I think it's on the 19th or the 20th?
20th at 4 p.m. And I popped, because of course I have to shamelessly promote. I popped a PDF into the chat, and we have an amazing panel. As Whitney said, this conference is really focusing on Native and rural women. And what we want to do in Minnesota is just share some of the models. And so we do have three incredible young Native women who are going to be presenting. Nevada Little Wolf, who's with the Page Amendment, our equity in funding for education. We have Vanessa Goodthunder, who runs an early K program in Lower Sioux, which is just groundbreaking, and she's just this amazing young woman. And we have Danny Perotas from northeastern Minnesota, who does a lot of work in land access, food sovereignty, just amazing. And then we are going to talk about our work at 100 Rural Women. So earlier we introduced Delaney and Jasmine and Emma, because we want to really lift up the importance of organizations working with students and fellows to, you know, not only help us build our organizations, but to get their perspectives and their thoughts. And it's so exciting to have young women that are passionate about rural. I always say, these guys have heard this 50 times for sure, but in our convenings, it's always like, it gives me hope for the future. So I'm just thrilled to be part of this conference. I'm thrilled that Whitney was able to take time, I feel guilty, away from her vacation today to join us, but we just really appreciate it. And Deb Haaland, I know a lot of you on this call, as I see some names, you've worked in DC, you've worked with secretaries, you know how those schedules work, and so often it's out of the secretary's control of what they can do. So I know we'll find a great connection speaker to speak at the conference. But yeah, so that's unfortunate, but the fact that she was interested in coming, and I know that you'll stay connected with her. So why don't we, a couple quick things before I forget. Whitney, can you repeat the name of the organization in Oregon? Was it WILD, about the DC work, policy work?
Oh, Sustainable Northwest was the organization. And okay. They jump-started a coalition called Rural Voices for Conservation Coalition, RVCC. Okay. RVCC. And there's just a number of really incredible organizations involved in that now. And I think it's not coordinated by Sustainable Northwest anymore. I think it's coordinated by Wallowa Resources, which is also in Oregon. And they will
Okay.
be at Rural Women Everywhere too, as a panelist, and that'll be great. So I've stayed in touch with them. Oh, and Maya Inzer, the rad rural woman I was talking about, she is
Yeah.
now working with the National Forest Service, and I think at a a really important policy level in DC. So hopefully we stay connected.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, let's move. Oh,
yeah.
go ahead. Oh, that was
Our
just me to
lieutenant
you.
go. Oh, okay. That was great.
I was just pitching some ideas.
Yeah,
for
everybody
speakers, you
just
guys.
go ahead and pitch some ideas for how we're going to fill this this very important slot.
Yeah,
and
so
how I can hit
look-
some of the same notes that we were hoping Deb Holland could
Yeah,
address for us.
we're pretty proud of our Lieutenant Governor and the fact that she's the first Native woman to serve.
Yeah,
So,
that's awesome.
and she's incredible. She's spoken to our mentorship group. She's just amazing. So I just threw that in there. But we'll move to questions. One thing, can you give a question from Linda Larson? Can you share a story or example about a Civic Saturday outcome?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. Because honestly, in the work that I do with all these convenings, like gatherings take a lot of time and effort, and then you wonder what are the outcomes? What are the goals and objectives for those beyond just getting together and singing Kumbaya or talking about those nitty-gritty issues. And I feel the same way about Civic Saturday, or I felt the same way about Civic Saturday, the need to make sure we were working backwards in a way. What was something we were looking to address, and how could Civic Saturday help address that? And the thing in Athens that we were needing to address was a coming together around Main Street, and the belief in the program that was being launched at that time in 2018. We had just been designated as a Main Street. We didn't really know what that meant, but what it does is it opens up a lot of pathways to money, grants, organizing, but it didn't really have an action arm beyond kind of this administrative arm of just trying to piece together how we're gonna do this work. So Civic Saturday sort of became the let's show them what it looks like type arm of the work. And so every quarter since then, we have picked in a different location on Main Street to gather, except during COVID, we weren't able to gather that way. We had to gather online, but different location to gather and to show people what's going on in Main Street and what some of the projects are, and highlight the leaders who are working on like buildings or new enterprises or new small businesses. The very first gathering we had was in a dilapidated park in the center of Main Street that was full of like dog poop and garbage, and it needed some serious weeding, and it was just a real eyesore. And so we actually had the event in that park and told everybody to wear their rubber boots. And after that, the park got cleaned up and turned into a new enterprise called Pocket Park. And that's where we have a lot of now outdoor music events, art events, and gatherings. And it started with Civic Saturday. Or it started with Main Street and Civic Saturday, helped show. A lot of this is like modeling, I think. And I think that's what Rural Women Everywhere, that's kind of what I imagine it to be. It's a modeling of who we are and what we value, and hopefully a celebration of our identities, our histories, and an acknowledgement of where we've come from. And sometimes just showing those things is just really, really powerful.
What about another question for Linda? Is Rural Women Everywhere interested in engaging women who are currently in elected office?
That's a great question too, Linda. You're awesome. So in 2019, we had our first Rural Women Summit, and it was in person. And we partnered with VoteRunLead, which is a national organization, but has a really strong presence in Minnesota, I think. And it's, encourages women to run for office. And for that gathering, we had at least two workshops that they ran. One was, kind of like a 101 crash course on how do you run for office? How do you discern if this is your thing, if this is your call, this is what you should be doing. And then there was a lot of role playing about, like knocking on doors and things like that. So that was really fun. And then later on that evening, I remember they hosted a big banquet where they had a lot of interesting speakers talk about what it's, share these kind of success stories of women running and sometimes not winning, but changing the trajectory of their communities. So short, that's a long, answer to short question, but Rural Women Everywhere, this virtual event, this is the first time we've done the virtual version of this. And certainly we'll have a number of elected officials participating, but we have not created a breakout or a workshop that is similar to the one that we did in 2019. But as I'm talking about it, I'm like, we don't have to wait for another big national gathering, whether it's virtual or in person. We could be doing more of those sort of like crash course. Is this for you? I like that idea.
And just about VoteRunLead too, we have Beth Peterson with us today, who's the new state director in Minnesota, and she popped in the chat how to get a hold of her. And Beth, maybe why don't you just tell us what Run 51 is, quick, and then because that's just sort of a nice segue into that a little.
Yeah, VoteRunLead has a new initiative called Run 51, where we are shifting the Minnesota legislature to majority-led women by 2024. So we're looking for women interested in running for state legislature. Here in Minnesota, we have just over 30 seats that we need to shift in order to have that parity in the state legislature here. We're also right now focusing on New York and Georgia, and we'll be shifting into some other states after these first three. So very exciting work here. Love to hear about our partnership, in the past, and I'm here for you if you're interested in running.
Yeah, and Beth is from rural Minnesota, yay! And you served on which city? Were you on Eveleth? No, what city council were you on? Eveleth?
Yes, yep. I served. I'm a one-term Eveleth city councilor up here on the Iron Range. Currently living in Aurora, though.
Yep, I love it. So that's up on our Iron Range for geography when you think about that. So yes, and then another question we just had is if I'm going to be sending out a list of all the links provided in the chat. Absolutely, we'll pop these all on our website too. So everything we've talked about and all the links in the chat and more will be on the website under resources. So please check that out. Grace, do you want me to read this question or would you like to ask it?
Sure, it's kind of a long question. So I work in a county that has an urban city center and mostly rural communities outside of that in the county. And so one of the things that my agency does is fund nonprofits who provide direct services to impact health, education, and financial stability of folks in our communities throughout the county. And one of the things that I'm wondering that is maybe a community specific question, but if you have any insights into the nonprofit ecosystem in rural communities, there are a lot of nonprofits in our city center, and I'm finding it difficult to break into that ecosystem if it exists in our rural communities. I feel like it probably does, and I just may not know the right people. So a question about that on what insights you have on the nonprofit ecosystem in rural communities. And then also, just a thought that maybe there's folks out there that want to start agencies and just are not aware of the resources that are available to help them achieve that goal. And that's another reason that I'd like to continue to connect with people in our rural area.
I mean, I don't have a blanket answer for the nonprofit ecosystem for that exists in rural America. I mean, my own experience with it has been there's some Cracker Jack nonprofits in like in my own town, and in the last few years there's been a turnover in leadership in a lot of those, and the leadership is now younger, mostly female, interestingly, and that those women are more geared toward collaboration, finding one another, creating those spaces where they get to share and exchange, knowledge that they've developed over the years. So that's hopeful. I think, sometimes the nonprofit ecosystem in rural communities is kind of an old guard type situation, old guard system. And even those civic groups that are really, that can be really helpful in a community, everything from Kiwanis to Rotary to Optimist Club, those are places where nonprofit executives often plug in, and that can be a space to meet up with them. I'm trying to think if there's like any kernel of wisdom that you wouldn't already have. That so much of the work that happens in rural is relationship based, and finding those spaces where you're just participating and not necessarily trying to control or lead right away, but just showing up. That's how I've found a way into some of the ecosystem we have in my own community. And the last thing I wanted to say about that, what was it? It was just, Main Street. I was surprised at how Main Street as a designation can help connect the dots, or can be a hub space for nonprofits writ large. We often think of Main Street as just a small business support system, or as something that is just for that one street in your community. But so often it could be the umbrella for creating the ecosystem that your community needs. And it's just sort of like the heartbeat of something bigger. So looking into that could be interesting too. That's good. I know you're doing incredible work, and I know it's it can be hard in us.
Yeah, and thanks for that question, Grace, because we're so fragmented. I was asked a question yesterday about, just the difference between rural, urban, and, it's geography, it's space, it's, how do you connect? I'm excited to build on what Whitney just said about being on the cusp of change with a lot of our civic and foundations. And there's just a lot of changes in Minnesota, and it's young, it's women, it's diversity, it's all those pieces. One thing that I Propel, which is an organization in Minnesota, I just got pulled into a group. I live in Itasca County, and they invited folks that run nonprofits into a cohort. So I just had my first couple of meetings, and it was really interesting. So then I was meeting other nonprofits in Itasca County that I didn't know anything about. So I think there's little kernels of that going on around, but we should catch up and visit a little bit and see if there's anything I can share, because that's one of the things we've done with these 50 meetings is, what are the networks? Where are those organizations? How do we better connect? So love to visit more about that.
That sounds good. And thanks for the comment, Maddie. I'm glad that you're also facing similar issues. We're in the same part of the state.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. Thanks so much on that question. Whitney, when you think about women in leadership, I had this question come through about specifically local leadership, and you've touched on this a little bit, but why do you think it's important for more women to serve in local, and particularly in elected offices? And what can we do as rural women to best empower them? From your perspective, what do you think?
Well, I think it's important for a lot of reasons that women are in leadership positions, and known leadership positions in communities. And I think a lot of that has to do with what I was talking about earlier, this sense of needing to show, model, and just to show to show and model for our young women, for the community at large, that there's a whole range of untapped and underutilized gifts and skills and talents that just they've just not been tapped. So, that, and partly I just feel so strongly that we're just in this moment that requires us to have a bigger imagination, to be more expansive in our, in what we imagine our country and our world could be. And so we have to sort of practice that imagination, and that involves changing the status quo just every time, flipping the narrative, flipping the power structure, and the power structure by and large is still white male dominated. And especially in our rural communities, we get comfortable, or a lot of our communities feel comfortable with just the way things have always been. It doesn't have to be that way. And women in leadership is part of ushering in that bigger imagination, that expansiveness. And I think it leads to more inclusion as well. And what was the second part of the question? Was how do we encourage women?
Yeah,
or how
encourage, empower. How do we best encourage is a better is a good word, and I think empower is a good word too. It's like how do we help each other move forward in rural?
Well, the way we go about it at Rural Assembly and with the Daily Yonder and with rural strategies in general is we're about listening and telling stories. So there's a whole lot of people there who don't realize that they are storytellers, that they have experience that needs to be shared, that they are a light in the world. And so being that place that provides a platform for them to practice their narrative, practice their story, and listen to others, that's an empowering experience. Getting to share truths or articulate things that you've never been invited to articulate before. So that's something we try to do a lot at Rural Strategies. I think this kind of Zoom meeting, these kinds of, just informal, no pressure kind of gatherings, inviting people to share as you have. I love, Teresa, how you call out people and just ask them to ask your question, tell us about this. That's a gentle and a powerful way to bring people into the knowledge of their own power and leadership potential.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's another question that, of course, this is for me, because I always ask this in the convenings we do. And I think Zoom made part of this when I look at this, but when you think about COVID and what we've been going through and what we are still going through, and hopefully we'll come out of this someday, what do you think the positive things are that came out of COVID that we need to retain and really build into our lives? And particularly for rural women, And
oh, that's such a big question. And it's one I bet we'll be exploring for multiple generations, probably, what this has meant for our society and ourselves personally. Something my sister-in-law said to me the other day was, man, COVID is like this time where we've been just pulling people, making people come into a self-awareness that maybe we haven't had before. And some of us are kicking and flailing at that. Like, I don't want to, think about how my actions affect others. I don't want to think about what the socio-political structure of our country has been and what's happening around me. But this pulling people into self-awareness could be a gift, and it does seem to be somewhat of a gift. And I count myself among those people whose sense of self has had to be, or understanding who I am in the world has had to be elevated. We're all like in this period of deep discernment. I think this word discernment, of trying to suss out what is ours to do in the world. The issues are big: broadband, healthcare, we talked about all of them, climate change, dismantling racism is probably the most important thing of, in our moment in time. But what is ours to do on that continuum, and not burning out on any particular issue, but understanding how to nourish ourselves so that we can nourish others, so that we can make a change. We have the opportunity right now. COVID is the opportunity in some ways that maybe we've all just been putting off or waiting for. I was thinking the other day too about how I was traveling every, I don't know, 2 times a month for years, doing this work for Rural Assembly. And I was so burned out, and I was not taking care of myself or my family or plugging into my community the way I needed to be. And COVID has grounded me. It was the only thing that maybe could have ground us to a halt in a way, that forced us into, again, that self-awareness, that discernment, and just the realization of some of the things that we need to be working on and where we need to put our energies. So,
Yeah.
well, it's such a great question, though. One we'll just keep on mining.
Mhm. I love it. I love it. And just listening to Whitney too, and those are such good comments. And I just think about 100 Rural Women too. I mean, we could have never connected. We couldn't, we would have had to have Whitney travel here, if we didn't do it this way. I would have never been able to work with the students that I'm working with. I wouldn't get to see all of you on the same screen. So what we've learned is people want to connect in community, but they also want to connect broader too. So I agree. I think I really
So
like that way
true.
when you think about awareness and grounding. And I was one of those travelers too, and definitely know that. And I just, if you have another question, throw it in. I've got a big final question for Whitney that I hadn't run by her, that I just thought about as she talked about this. But I'll just ask it, Whitney. I think, and I sort of have an inside scoop because I'm fortunate enough to be friends with Whitney on Facebook and a couple other things. But when you think about your daughters and you think about their future, what's your vision for them? How do you want to see things differently, for them to have a different and better and brighter future?
That makes me kind of emotional. Think about that. But I, of course, think about it every day, all the time. We were traveling to the beach this week. It's a 6-hour drive, and I was listening to my podcast, and I thought they were listening to their stuff in the back seat, but they were actually listening to my podcast. And I was listening to a conversation between Brian Stevenson and a commentator from Vox, and they were talking about, his book Just Mercy, and about dismantling racism, and about the museum that he's overseen the creation of in Montgomery, around justice and equality. And it was some hard stuff that they were talking about. And my youngest one asked me if we could go see that museum. And I was like, yes, of course, we've got to go see that museum, and it hadn't actually occurred to me that, she's 8, and I don't know exactly how to have the conversation with her, or the conversations that need to be had with her, but I know that our kids are ready for them. They're like, and it's up to me and my husband and, our community in many ways to show them, to model for them what has happened, that we mourn it, that we, want to make amends for it, and that we've got a big, bright future ahead of us as we do those things. Like, part of that journey of reconciliation is also something beautiful. So just, that's my next thing, is I'm going to take them to see that museum, my 8-year-old and my 11-year-old. And I feel like so facing that kind of history and then facing outward into our community is maybe part of the key to their flourishing later. And then I'll just end on a funnier note. We were playing Would You Rather later on in the drive, and my husband pulled out the card. Would you rather sneeze dice or fart sprinkles? And my 8-year-old said, oh my God, both. And I was like, and that's also flourishing, is doing it, having both, having, your sneezes be dice and your farts be sprinkles. I want them to enjoy that in their lives too.
I love that. And I knew I didn't give you any prep on that, but I think we were really leading to that. And I did just throw in the chat, just the link to Just Mercy, and the movie's out there, the book's incredible, and it's, as Whitney says, it's amazing, and I need to find out more about that museum, so I'll do a little
I'm sorry, I
research on
can't think
that.
of the whole name of
Yeah.
the museum. It's a long, it's kind of a long name, but
Yeah,
so if anybody has that on the top of your head, type it in. But it's
yeah,
in Montgomery, and we should all make a pilgrimage probably for ourselves and
Yeah,
our children.
yeah, it's amazing. Well, great. Well, I just want to make sure that we wrap up on time and get everybody off to the rest of their day. But I'm just digging through here. Do I see if there aren't any more questions? I think I know we're running towards time here, so I think we'll wrap up. As I mentioned earlier, we will have everything, all of our resources up on the web, and then we'll get the video edited. So we will have that in sections so people can listen to the video afterwards. So that will all be up on our website. Please, please, please register for the conference next week. There are such incredible presenters. I am so excited to be part of that and to participate in it. I was fortunate to have gone in person to the original one, which was amazing. And I met so many amazing women. I met so many women from Minnesota that I'd never met. So that was fun too, it's like, oh my God, here I am in Carolina and I'm meeting these incredible women from Minnesota that I don't know. And I've connected with all of them since I've gotten back.
God, Minnesota always comes out for this. I mean, like y'all, I just love it. I love the Minnesota contingent.
I love it.
So many incredible folks. Teresa, thank you for this. You're the best. You all are the best.
Thank you. And this was just a great conversation. And we want to do a lot more of these because every week I get to meet incredible, incredible women. And I just keep thinking, how do we better connect and how do we lift each other up? And so thanks so much, Whitney.